Hello, Anna. Welcome back to Body Beyond the Scales, the podcast that helps you get stronger and more confident in your body through building better habits. Today, I am joined by Charlie, and we are going to be talking all about ultra-processed foods, what they are, the myths around them, and should we be worried, and I guess what we should be doing what we want to worry about instead. So, Charlie, without further introduction, who are you?
I'll try and keep this really brief. I am a sports nutritionist by trade, and then I work a lot in the general population with people. I help people with the interaction between their work, their well-being, and their performance. And then loads of other jobs that I won't bore people with. But if you can think of a job in nutrition, I've probably done it as well.
We started this before this recording. We started talking, and Charlie was explaining to me about the 10,000 jobs that he does. So, literally, if there's a job that Charlie hasn't done, it does sound like it just doesn't exist yet. So, let's talk a little bit about ultra processed foods then, or UPFs as sometimes they're called. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown? What are they?
Yes, and it's quite difficult because the industry itself isn't really that sure. One of the interesting things about them is like they've done studies where they've asked nutritionists to say like, is this ultra processed food or not? And there's no real agreement. Like where one would be a perfect agreement across everyone, we're on like 0.3 among nutritionists. So like no one really agrees on what these things are. In theory, they are foods that have been industrially processed, contain ingredients you wouldn't normally see in your kitchen, and they've probably been processed to change your sensory experience of them. So it might change how they feel in your mouth or how they crunch or how they taste, some sort of enhancement in that way.
Yeah. And I think that kind of like brings us to one of the biggest challenges when it comes to ultra processed foods. There isn't really a clear definition. So I think ultimately in our minds, we just go to the colloquial terms and we think, okay, well, junk food. And we immediately go to food where we associate that with being like quote unquote good or bad. And we go, okay, well, ultra processed foods therefore must be bad foods. And we kind of create this straight line that probably doesn't exist. So yeah, I guess with us struggling to define it, or rather like like super crystal clear definition, how has that caused problems with the way that we're talking about ultra processed foods, or the way that someone might see ultra processed foods be spoken about on social media, for example?
I think there's a few ways. I think you've just pinpointed one in that if you've got a huge group where no one's really sure of it, but we're being made to feel like it's bad to ever consume them, it gives people a really small amount of foods that they actually can consume and feel safe to do so. And I think that is a huge problem because what people who have good intentions, who talk about the dangers, quote unquote, dangers of ultra processed food, want is for people to eat better. And they think if we give people enough information about these types of foods, they will eventually change their behaviors in a way that would be health promoting. What generally happens is we overwhelm people to the point of paralysis, and they generally eat worse because they just go, I haven't got a clue what we can and can't eat anymore. This is stressing me out. I'm going to go to McDonald's. It sounds really silly to say, you'd be amazed how many people would just say like, I just ended up giving up because it was all too much and it was too confusing. So I just didn't do anything.
Yeah, I think like you've just highlighted a really key thing, because we know that for people to make sustainable health changes, they need to be able to stick to the sustainable health changes. So like if we're feeling overwhelmed by the decisions and that's therefore leading to people like completely going in the other direction, well, we can make a pretty easy conclusion it's not sustainable. And like this kind of black and white thinking of don't eat ultra processed foods versus like, it's X is not really that helpful in like practical and tangible terms.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the issues is people have common sense. And so when you say to someone with common sense, or whey protein or your wholemeal bread or your yogurt is the same as a pot noodle or as like a bar of chocolate, people kind of go, is it though? And some people, like sadly, are being convinced that their bread is the problem that they need to solve. And I just think, having worked in the industry for a while, there are probably 1,001 things that I try and change for someone before I look at the ingredients list on their bread. I don't know about you, but I personally don't really look at the ingredients list of my foods.
No, like I am not spending time looking at that. Like the only time I do that is if I'm cooking for my brother who is celiac and I need to find out if it's got like any gluten in it. Like unless you are looking at those like, for like allergy reasons, I don't really think you should be obsessing over an ingredients list.
No, absolutely not. And I think the, if I can't pronounce it, it's not good for you, probably says more about the intellect of the people making that statement than it does about the actual ingredients themselves. There's a huge amounts of biases that not only the ultra-processed food comes across, but they actually kind of weaponize these things. So like this naturalist bias of if you can't pronounce it, you can't eat it. There's real neophobia, so basically anything new scares people, and so they really lean on stuff like that. There's all kinds of like false dichotomies, like you said, like it's good or bad, and yeah, and lots of other little tricks they play on the mind that do confuse people and make people assume that these things are worse than they are. If we look at the research on ultra processed food, the vast majority of it is correlational. So it's when people do this, these outcomes tend to happen, which for anyone who doesn't know nutrition research, you cannot therefore say this causes this. A huge example that I use all the time is, and some of the people talk about this will say, well, people who ate more ultra processed food had a greater risk of depression. And so they are implying that the causation is you eat these foods, you then get depression. I think it's very easy to make an argument for people who struggle with depression may be more likely to lean on these foods. The fact that people can't appreciate that might be the way is just baffling to me. Of
And then, like, a lot of these things are bi-directional in the sense of, like,
course.
I am, like, eating, like, I am eating the chocolate bar because I am depressed, but
And that
also,
does not make
like,
me better.
yes, it's not making me feel better, like,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
like, it's one of these, like, cycles, but we can't say what came first, the
No.
depression or the chocolate bar, the chicken or the egg.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and I think having those conversations, these conversations require, like, nuance, and a lot of people talking about ultra processed foods are not giving it. So if you are seeing this on your social media, you're
Yeah.
flicking through the soundbite of "Don't eat anything that your grandma wouldn't recognise."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's much easier to say than, "Well, it depends,"
Yeah, yeah.
on what
Yeah.
you should eat.
That's really common where they kind of, if they were to talk about these things and have a debate on a normal playing ground, they realize that the people who are trying to scare us about these foods, they realize that they would lose the argument. So they try and take you to a place where it then becomes very hard to argue with it. And you go, oh, that does sound quite bad. A really good example is Pringles. There's a lot of talk about Pringles at the moment where they are perfectly designed so that they never fill you up. And that's exactly why people eat loads. And once you pop, you can't stop and all that kind of stuff. And everyone's like so invested in that story and that narrative that they've not thought like, when was the time that I've ever eaten Pringles as a meal to feel full? I can't think of a single time when that's the case. And then when you factor in the fact that people still buy those foods, the branding and the marketing is very clever and they tell you can't stop once you start. That becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where you're like, wow, they've told me that I can't. It almost gives you permission to keep eating them. All of
Yeah.
these things play into our food choices. And yes, they probably are designed in a way that makes them very hyper palatable. So they taste very nice. They're very easy to eat mindlessly. It doesn't mean that like we are addicted to Pringles and there's just no physical way. For example, in Pringles, like they do smaller tubs now that you can buy in like train stations. I saw the other day. You're not going back and buying 9 more once you've had some. So it shows you physically can if there are constraints put in place. So yeah, it's a very common thing with their arguments is they would try and drag you to places where it feels a bit more uncomfortable and it's harder to kind of go back with any sort of logic.
Yeah, I think a really good way to think about it is that you're not seeing someone going back 10 times to buy the mini tub of Pringles, or you're not seeing someone breaking into Asda on an evening to, rob a Curly Whirly.
Yeah.
Whilst these foods might be, like, tasty and they might be heightening your senses and, like, your body is responding to them from a, like, evolutionary standpoint of going, "Oh, well, actually, it's got more sugar and it's got more salt and it's got this,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
perfect for the famine that I am preparing
Yes.
for that doesn't exist in today's society." But, like, that's what it's preparing for. It's, like, it's not addictive in the way that people are,
No.
like, selling it that it is. Like, you are not breaking into Asda for it. So, I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think if you could use a curly whirly as a breaking tool, because they're quite hard. I think you could beat someone with a curly whirly quite efficiently.
yeah,
Um,
like, if you really wanted to, like,
you
you
could
could get a good
weaponize a
go
curly
with it,
whirly.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then if anything untoward happened, you could eat it and that would
There's
get rid
no
of the argument.
forensics. Yeah,
Yeah,
you are right. Yeah.
quite
So
effective in
yeah,
England.
we have facilitated a crime here. Someone's going to go and do this.
When
Uh,
this has been put into evidence in a courtroom.
yeah, yeah. We're going to get done for like some sort of conspiracy to kill or
Yeah,
something.
conspiracy to
Um,
kill Curly Whirly.
yeah. But that's a really good example. The chocolate one is the one that I use all the time because people say I'm addicted to chocolate. And I'll say, have you ever had a chocolate dessert at a restaurant? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, have you ever ordered 7 more? Now, the constraints at a restaurant are really interesting because it's normally 30 to 45 minutes after your meal. So you are full and you're eating a dessert to enjoy it rather than to fill up. There is no distraction. There's no TV, phone, laptop, and it is pre-portioned for you. And actually, when we create those constraints for people at home, they find they have similar levels of control. Whereas if we think about how we normally eat these foods, we don't normally have that kind of constraint. So there is a huge amount of debate around like food addiction. And I think the fact that we're not universally addicted to the same types of foods kind of makes me think like, wouldn't everyone like cheese, or wouldn't everyone like really salty foods, or everyone like chocolate? Not everyone does. So I think there's possible kind of addiction to the feeling of having the chocolate. So that kind of you might be addicted to eating in a way where you're not addicted to the food itself. Now, there's not like hard evidence on that. That's just a theory that I have, which I can imagine would be true. But yeah, I don't think we are addicted to certain foods.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think there are foods that we are like as humans in general.
Universally, yeah.
Yeah, that we are universally like addicted to because of the manufacturing. And I think, I mean, without going into a big conversation about like the current like political climate, but like political climates definitely influence our belief in science and our belief in
Yeah, of
like
course.
institutions and how effective like big corporations are at things. So like if we're believing that quote unquote big food is causing problems, like it was then a lot easier to believe, well, they maybe might be manufacturing the food so that we all get addicted to it, so that, and like you can see
Yeah.
how we end up down this road.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that, like, the people pushing that kind of almost conspiracy on us don't then consider like their role in that. In that, there are some people who want to discuss ultra processed food because they think it's something that maybe should be addressed as part of the wider food system. And I think there's probably a conversation to have there. There are people who on social media consistently move the goalposts of what ultra processed food is. It is in their interest to confuse you because you give them more attention, which they monetize. So if you want a conspiracy, the cynic in me says that some people are desperate for you to not understand food because they make money from your confusion and your desperation. So you could look at it that way.
Yeah, and I think like on that, the way that social media algorithms work, enjoy like and they work best on debate, on comments. So when someone posts something that says like X is true, it makes it then someone else goes, no, it's not. That's not true. But because of the way that social media works as well, you hear one thing once, someone repeats it, and then you think all of a sudden you've heard this 10 times, it's true. But in
Yeah.
reality, it takes so much more to debunk what has been
Mm,
like what has been said that's inaccurate, that is then, yeah. And I think that's one thing that we really need to be mindful of around people who talk about nutrition on social media, is that like they gain from the more fear they have around their content, the more traction their content will gain, and the more they will personally be able to monetize that and make, yeah, like make a career out of it, which ultimately that might be scarier than big food and being murdered with a curly whirly. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. I completely agree. I think it's a fascinating insight into how even health policy works in 2026. In that, if we're to look at the research base for ultra processed foods, the worst thing that could ever happen to someone's health or their nutrition, I don't really think it's there. It's certainly not top of the list for people. But social media now is almost driving policy because these conversations are happening in Parliament about ultra processed food. And it's because of certain books that were written that are then discussed non-stop online. People just assume that that is gospel. And therefore, that's driving policy. Whereas before, it wouldn't do that. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think social media and the collective voice from people, whether they're educated or not, will start to drive more health policy. And you've spoken about the politics of health, which we could talk about all day. But we're seeing that in the UK. We're certainly seeing it in the US. I think it's a really, really interesting way that food is working now.
Yeah, I think one thing that's particularly tricky is when people with PhDs, medical doctors, and people who are like working and researching in the space come out and make comments about ultra processed food. Now, whether they have a book out or not, which they might want to sell to you, may influence their opinion on said books, but that
Hmm.
might just be my opinion. But I
Yeah.
guess how do we make sure that we're understanding and critically thinking about the information that's been presented to us, and not just blanket believing it because someone has a PhD without feeling like we can't believe anyone with a PhD.
Yeah, and I think that's really difficult. I'm not sure I've necessarily got the answer because I think of the three biggest people talking about maybe nutrition, who've all been on TV and on social media. So if we look at Tim Spector, maybe from Zoe, Chris Van Tulleken, and the Glucose Goddess, there
Yeah.
we have an infectious disease doctor, an epidemiologist, and a biochemist. So between those three people who are informing the nutrition habits of millions of people, I'd imagine that not one consultation or one-to-one piece of work has been done with someone's nutrition. And so for those people to say these are the behaviors you should do is absolutely incredible to me. And I think the reason that we're focusing so much on food is because we've got people telling everyone about food who've never worked with someone one to one. And when you do, you realize how much of food is a symptom rather than the problem itself. And it's a behavior we need to change. And that's why I think most of this argument is kind of a bit pointless, because it's a behavior that is downstream for lots of other things, and no one's ever like speaks about them. No one's allowed to address them. Like I said, I do a lot of work in kind of productivity and corporate and performance and stuff like that. How people work affects their food way more than whether it's got a certain sweetener in it or not. It's just like the way that we live now, we are more overwhelmed than we've probably ever been, because we are plugged in 24/7. So we've got this brain that's supposed to know like 150 people. It's supposed to work intermittently. It works all of the time. It is exposed to like news about war in places that we'll never go to. It is exposed to vitriol from people online who we'll never see, information that's never remotely resembled the truth. And it's supposed to compute all of this. That's massively taxing. And then you put that brain in a food environment where it is easy to overeat, and then we see the consequences of it. So we've got all of these systemic drivers pushing our food behavior one way, and then societal beliefs and cultures that your food is your sole personal responsibility, which creates its own guilt and shame, which then creates further food. And we can see how that would spiral and become really difficult for some people.
Yeah, I think like exactly as you described there, it's not as simple as like, oh look, you see a food, you eat the food, it's all your fault. You made 100% of the decision that to like grab that food. And I think when we start to unpick this, it really comes down to it's more than just you know, you see a Malteser, you want a Malteser. It's and then therefore you can't stop eating the Maltesers. It's well, what have your stress levels been like during that day? How were you affected? Have you had the time? Are you working 3 jobs and you're not able to do that? Do you have the money? Do you have the finances to be able to afford other foods that would have kept you full? And instead, you know that you can afford that. Well, you can't afford a box of Maltesers these days. And Christ, the price of chocolate is ridiculous. But like, is like the hyper palatable food, is the ultra processed food like more accessible than what the fruit, vegetables, like whatever it is that would have otherwise kept you full? And I think when you realize that this is a bigger conversation than just I ate this and therefore I am a bad person, which I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of morality comes into this conversation. Actually, it kind of gets a bit more depressing. Actually, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it feels a lot harder to try and deal with. And I think one thing I'm really wary of is to not give people this sense that they have no autonomy over it, because we still
yeah,
do have an element of personal responsibility. But I think you can acknowledge that whilst also acknowledging why it's harder for some people than others, for all of those reasons you discussed, and then some more on top of that from a kind of genetic food psychology, all these kind of things as well. So yeah, it's just why don't you stop eating ultra processed gravy, and if you want it bad enough, you do it, is maybe slightly reductionist.
yeah, yeah. And I think like the other conversation that is really important to have around this is, well, who has the time to be doing the cooking and the preparing of the food? It's not the working class mum who is the single mum who is like providing for 3 kids but also has 3 jobs. It's the middle class and above person who
Yeah.
doesn't need to think about that and has the time and has the energy and has the resources, and it can become another way again, I think, where morality ends up being put into it, and they go, I am better for being able to do this, rather than it being actually maybe our socioeconomic position is slightly different. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I'm really interested in this, and I've spoke about this and written about it a few times, about how health has become more of a status thing, where you signal to people something about your economic situation, whether intentionally or kind of subconsciously, through some health behaviors. Now, there are loads of trends that we can think of that have jumped on this. Some of it's really positive. So if you think of things like CrossFit, High Rocks, Aqua even, like it is built around an identity that people assume. And I think that's really positive, because obviously lots of people are now more active, excuse me, because of those things. I think we see things like Zoe, for example, where they will do behaviors like wear a blood glucose monitor that's completely pointless. They will be scanning barcodes in shops and things like that. And that is not because, sometimes it's because they think it's healthier, but it's also a look at me, I'm conscious of my, so it's this kind of conscientious behavior that people are doing to signal that they are better. It's kind of like what maybe designer handbags would be for some people. For a certain class of person, these are the reasons I'm better than you, and this is just one of many.
yeah, and I think like when we start talking about, and you mentioned these earlier, but like ultra processed, talking about considering things like whey protein under ultra processed food, and considering yogurt under like processed foods. Like if we have those thoughts, what is the like ultimately how far back do we go until like we're churning our own butter? Like at what
Yeah,
at what point do we become you've got so much time on your hands that you're making your yogurt from
yeah,
scratch? Like, and I think
Yeah,
you've got to sometimes approach this and go, if I keep going down this line of thought of thinking that ultra processed foods are bad and therefore I can't eat them and I must cook everything from scratch, where does that leave you? And where does that how does that sit within your life? Does it positively benefit your life, or does it make you stuck in the kitchen for several hours a day? Like,
yeah.
where's the where are the how is it impacting your life beyond putting the food in your mouth?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I don't know about you, but I've never hunted or gathered any of the meals that I've ever consumed. In that
I
I've
don't know, in
never
central Manchester, I have often got my bow and arrow out.
like some sort of Hunger Games type
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
From Katniss Everdeen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've never skinned anything that I've eaten myself or anything like that. Um, I've opened the packets for things, but that's probably the extent I've gone to.
Yeah.
So, but you're absolutely right, and I actually think that when companies or movements create all these behaviours that make you a more virtuous person if you do them, they then move the goalposts so that you constantly have to try and keep up with. Is this okay with me this week, or can I not do this anymore? And that's a really common feature of any sort of trend almost, or any sort of fashion or things like that. In our human nature, it's hacking that human desire to be part of the group. And there are behaviors that are okay for the group and behaviors that aren't. And we have to constantly try and keep up with them. I think social media really expedites how much this can change, because you can send messages out every day saying what's okay has changed today. You can't do what you did. Whereas before it probably happened in months and years. Now it happens in minutes. Um, so people are having like the nutrition equivalent of Brat Summers trying to change like all of their food day by day, because the goalposts are changing all the time. And I think that's intentional from the people who are pushing these things, because they want you sort of clinging on and trying to guess. And you do see the comments of some of these posts where people are literally trying to out anti-UPF each other. And I'll go, you do that, oh bless you. Well, actually, like you said, I shell my own butter, and like, well, actually, no, I kill my own chickens. And it is a competition to see who can be the most virtuous. And it's frankly pathetic.
Yeah, and I think when we start to see it in this level, you're like, oh, actually, it probably the murdering of the chickens is probably not. It's
That's
probably
my own
actually not
line.
virtuous. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
See, all we've spoken about today, we've been recording for 23 minutes, and we've
We're
spoken about
killing a
murder
lot.
about 4 times.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I should have said that's a feature of all podcasts that I do. Yeah,
Someone will discuss death.
yeah. Someone will die. Yeah,
Probably the chickens.
probably.
Yeah. As long as they weren't killed with a curly whirly, then it's all right. We've got
True.
away with it. Yeah.
Well, not yet.
But yeah, I guess when we talk about ultra processed foods then, and we hear things that are confusing, and we're starting to think like, oh, this one person has said this and this other person has said that, one person has said like X is bad, the next person has said don't worry about it, and we then go for the middle ground of, oh
Hmm.
well, maybe I won't eat it as much. Like, is that the right thing to do? Or like, what's the best way to approach eating ultra processed food?
It's quite difficult, isn't it? Because I think, it really saddens me to say this as a nutritionist, but I think a lot of people ate better before they started trying to engage with nutrition information. And I think that kind of defeats the object of us having social media and trying to discuss these things. But I have a feeling that people intuitively have an all right idea of what is good for them and what isn't good for them. So I think before these things were happening, were people discussing whether their bread was right or wrong? Maybe people assumed that like wholemeal or brown bread was better because of fiber content. Some people know that. Were they thinking that their yogurt was wrong or that they were eating the wrong gravy? I don't think so. Did they know that if they saw off, like you said, like 3 share bags of Maltesers in the evening when they were sad, that probably wasn't optimal? I think people had a decent grasp of that was the case. So I almost want people to fall back on their intuition a little bit. Now, that's really difficult to say because some people have had food experiences and exposures of diet culture where they're scared of things like bread, for example. But by and large, there are 2 or 3 things that a lot of people can kind of focus on that would really help them. Everything else is kind of, if it's not, like you said earlier, if it's not really helping you and it feels loads better for it, you're better off unfollowing a lot of people. It's one of the best things you can do for your health is to unfollow people on social media at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing as well is if you're hearing lots of people talking about take this food out of your diet, take this food out of your diet, but they're not telling you what to replace it with, that can leave you in quite a difficult position, because what ends up happening is you go, okay, I'm going to stop eating Maltesers, and then but you've had a packet of Maltesers every night after dinner for the last 30 years. Well, it then gets to dinner time, and then you're like, well, I want my Maltesers, and you're like, and
Yeah.
you can last for so long, but you end up with a Malteser sized hole in your like post dinner time, and you're like, but I want to fill it, and eventually you're going to fill it with Maltesers because that's what you've always done. So like, if these people are saying don't do this, don't do that, but they're not giving you more positive health behaviors to it, like put in
Mhm.
place, or more like adding things into your diet, I would question how effective you think that that will be as a habitual change. Because, well,
Yeah.
yeah, don't
Yeah.
leave a Malteser size hole because you've got Maltesers that will fill it.
Yeah, 100%. And what happens is people um, think this food is bad. They'll cut it out for a few days. Then they will at some point have to reintroduce it because otherwise you go your whole life without doing it. And then they will feel bad because they have this morality around food and they'll see off literally everything else in their house. And then, like, what have you learned there? So I think it's okay to wish that the food environment was slightly more geared towards people having a more balanced, nutritious diet, and acknowledging that that probably isn't the case. Therefore, what tools do we have that help people with that? I think there's also an element of like these foods we often use for a reason, and people don't ever understand what the reason is. So, like, is it to deal with stress? Is it to deal with boredom? Is it to deal with like all these kinds of things? If you take food out, even those people who successfully take out Maltesers forever, you normally fill that with something else. And whether that's seen positively or not will depend on societal beliefs of what's good or bad. So I see people who eventually like stop relying on food as a crutch, but they will turn to exercise and that becomes compulsive, or they will turn to work. But because society heralds those things as positive things, they're kind of seen as, oh yeah, you're really good at that. But like if you're consistently breaking down with like a stress fracture or lots of niggles because you train too much, how is that a more positive thing? Maybe if you learned to cope with the thing you were struggling with that food was for, that would be a healthier way of doing things.
Yeah, I think like exactly as you said there, like you need tools in your toolbox if you are eating if you are eating food as a comfort when you get stressed, when you get bored, when you feel tired, when you are lonely. Like if you are doing that, you need alternative tools, and you need usually more than one. Like
Hmm.
just going, okay, well every time I feel stressed, I'm gonna exercise. All right, well, what happens when you've sprained your ankle and you now can't exercise and you are now
Hmm.
stressed? Like
Yeah.
it's having multiple tools to deal with things. And or what happens if you're really stressed but you're not at home and you don't have your trainer, so you can't go out for a run? Like, and it's having those techniques and tools that work anywhere, and can, like, you have got lots of different things that will work for you. I mean,
Yeah.
on that, have you got anything that you would recommend, without us going into an entire episode on emotional eating, but like, have you got anything that you would recommend as a like way to deal with stress, rather than food?
Yeah, definitely. I think instead of looking at like the acute in the moment stuff, which I think is really important, but I think we cover that quite a lot generally as an industry, in that what you said there is really interesting. When we have a identity that is solely around one thing, you are that thing being taken away from being screwed. So my background is working in sport. I did a job called Performance Lifestyle where you help athletes with everything outside of their sport, basically. And the athletes who their whole thing was their sport. You are not being selected, long-term injury, something happening away from being nobody. And I saw it a lot. I think we see this in people as well, in that the way that our lives are designed now, in that we do have not much of an identity. We saw it during COVID where people said the gyms have to stay open because that's like a huge part of who I am. And that is great and it's good for your mental health. I agree. If that's the only thing, that's a really shaky place to be. Having lots of different identities and lots of different things that you do is a positive thing. I see it with food all the time, in that I've had people who struggle with weight loss for years knit themselves thin. And that's not because the energy expenditure of knitting. It's just that when you have something in the evening that you really look forward to, A, you do it so it helps you to de-stress in that moment. But B, you start to think like, I really enjoyed that and I'd love to have more energy for that. What changes would then have to happen for me to be able to do that more? So there's really good evidence on what is required to recover from work, essentially. And there's four things. One is relaxation, so the ability to just switch off, which no one ever does. There is detachment from work. And when we think of how work has changed, people now work more hybrid or more remote. Work and life kind of blend into the one, and there's not really any separation. So we don't really detach that well. There is control over your time. People feel like they're losing that a little bit. Work is bleeding into evenings, early mornings, weekends. And there is mastery. So the ability to feel like you are pursuing something and improving at something. Now, if you look at the kind of average day-to-day life, we wake up, social media straight away, little bit of life admin, start work, normally from bed or from like somewhere like not, there's not even a routine of like, I'm going to shower first because I've not got any calls today. So I'll just go straight into work. And then we work all day, not much break, no lunch break, kind of switch all the time from tool to tool. There's constant context switching, social media and food to help cope with how shit that feels. And then we get to the end of the day so tired and so like nothing that we just doom scroll because we've got nothing, no capacity left whatsoever. And then you kind of think, well, that is a life that is desperate for some sort of reward, some sort, just to feel something. And often food fills that gap. If you design a life where you don't feel like you just need to feel something because nothing feels like anything anymore, you're probably not going to use food as much.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good point, that having things outside of like outside of work is really important. And I think that to a degree there's such a status symbol around being a hard worker and going above and beyond and working beyond your hours and working until like tomorrow basically, and working until you start work the next day. And I think that like that has left us without like space to ask
Mm,
us like who we are, like, and
yeah,
again,
yeah,
if you then took work away, who are you without your job? So then making sure you've got hobbies and things to enjoy, like,
yeah,
and a life, like
yeah,
having those things, it would be, well, without this one specific thing, who are you? And that's, I think identity is such an important thing that you've mentioned there, that like we really need to make sure that we have things going beyond, yeah, beyond just what we do, and like having hobbies and having like not to use the trending term at the moment, but like analog hobbies, like where we are not on our phones, we are not just sitting and watching TV, like where you are knitting, you are crocheting, you
yeah,
are doing
yeah,
it by numbers, you are like reading a book. And I think, yeah, of course, again, we can talk about the socioeconomic sides of these things and like
yeah, of
what it
course.
means to be able to do these things. But if you are able to afford time and you don't actually need to work into the evening, and you are
Mm,
doing that as as a choice, effectively setting better boundaries with work will leave you in a better position with food, with like your own life, and you will actually enjoy your life more. Like, yeah, like who knew you enjoyed knitting? Like maybe if you do something that you enjoy, you'll actually like it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's a huge push now to like, oh, I'm good at this. Well, I best do an Instagram account about it and show everyone else. And maybe I'll
Yeah,
do my own knitting course and monetize that. And it's just like, just do. And I'm really guilty. Like all these things I talk about, it's basically me calling myself out. Like we discussed the amount that I work off this call. So, yeah, and I see it with coaches as well. And they're like, oh, my whole identity is work. Even training, which used to be a release, has now become part of best film this to show everyone. I best talk about it all the time. And so, yeah, I don't actually think we're very good at practicing what we preach either.
yeah.
With regards to this, I have a couple of jobs that are kind of AI based. So I co-founded an AI company, and so like even my downtime, I'm on a computer. Like this is really cool, and I really like it. I'm learning a lot, but I'm like, I also need like to play guitar for a bit or something analog as well, because otherwise I'm just staring at this screen 14 hours a day.
Yeah, that's one of the things I did. I started playing piano again, and I was like, "Oh my
Yeah,
god!" Like, I was like, "My brain is coming back to
yeah,
life."
yeah,
But like, yeah, if you can do something that, especially if it's something that you enjoyed doing as a kid, like that can be really useful to like, yeah, get your brain doing something that is away from a screen and away from
mm,
the quick dopamine, especially of like scrolling.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Just on the topic of, I guess, implements, and to circle back to something that you said earlier, we obviously spoke about like, I guess, the food environment as it exists. And we very much live in an obesogenic environment in the
hmm,
sense that this is the most food availability that we have ever had from an evolutionary perspective. Like within the last 50 to 100 years, basically human society has gone from scared of famine to, oh, famine's not an issue anymore. In terms of, especially most of the developed world, that is where we're at. And I think one thing to recognize is that the environment around you plays a big part. So how can
hmm,
we as individuals make sure that our environment is tailored to us making healthy nutrition choices?
mm. Yeah, it's a good point, and it's important to acknowledge how difficult it is, I think. Your body is incredibly good at avoiding starvation, but there is no protective mechanism the other way because it's just never been a problem. So that is a real challenge. I think a lot of it comes that people assume that giving food this morality will help, and that if I say this food's bad and I ban it from my house, that will help me eventually, which it's really difficult because it's never helped anyone that I've ever met. And I've worked with thousands of people, and I'm desperate to see one where it works. It's just not happened yet. So instead of like moralizing food and then guilting or shaming yourself for eating the food, when we have a more self compassionate approach to our food, it allows us to be curious and say, why did this happen? And so, actually, if you can, you don't even just have to look at your food environment, you can look at your environment as a whole and look at your day as a whole and say, like, what happened in this day that led to this point where I've seen off a whole packet of custard creams? What happened? Now, part of that is the custard creams are in a bowl on the side and I sit next to the side. So that is probably not ideal. We will change that. We'll add some friction in there. But there are other things um, that we can do that will help change those behaviors. So if we see going for a walk as a way to give yourself some headspace rather than I need to hit a step count that someone on Instagram has set me, that changes the frame of how you go about that walk. Because I think a obesogenic environment is, yes, it's the food environment. It's also like, do we move? Is our life designed to help us move and stuff like that? Probably not. I have to have a walking pad, so otherwise my step count would be about 800 steps for the day. So like it's things like that where you look, what is the problem? What is within my capacity to change that? And again, socioeconomic things sometimes do play a part in that because I have a standing desk that I can adjust. I've got a walking pad. Like that's 500 quid straight away. I'm fortunate that I can pay, that other people can't pay. I've got a dog, which sometimes I'm fortunate about, depending on what she's like, but I have to walk her. So that's something else that changes. I am 6'3", 31-year-old male who can go and walk at pretty much any time of the night and feel relatively safe. There are lots of people who that is not the case for. So there are all of
Yes,
these things.
I as a 5'6" woman, with there are certain times where I will not be going out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And again, I don't think as an industry we really fully appreciate those things when you're just like, oh, there's no excuse for not getting your steps. Piss off, because there
Yeah.
are several excuses why people can't. But there are normally things within your control. And I think we can be compassionate towards ourselves. And that sometimes means, where can I call myself out for the things that I'm saying, oh, there's nothing I can do, where actually there's 5 or 6 things that I probably can do. How can I make the best of those?
Mhm. And I think they're like going, well, how can I make the best of it? Like I'm going, all right, well, I can't go out and it's the UK, it's winter,
Mm,
it's dark by 6 p.m. or even
yeah.
earlier, usually when we're in the winter. But I'm excited by the fact it's now March. But, if we're saying I can't go out after 6 p.m., well, when can you go out? Is it a case of scheduling? Are you not taking your lunch break and you are
Hmm.
allowed lunch break? Are you starting work at 9 o'clock, getting out of bed at 8:55, and like actually you could have got up an hour earlier and gone for a half an hour walk? Like, where is there space within your day to make these changes? And where can you
Hmm.
hold yourself to that higher standard? But where can you appreciate where the boundaries exist? And I think it's about doing both sides of that spectrum,
Hmm.
holding the standard, but also
Yeah.
making sure you appreciate the boundaries that exist within your life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes it's worth looking at what we said earlier about like what in your life motivates you to try and make this change in the first place. So why are you even bothering to change? If I say this to people who work a lot, like if all you do is work and sleep and then eat, your brain has really got no reason. Like, oh, if you go for a walk, you have more energy. For what? More work? Great. Like I probably won't do that. Whereas if you've got things that you want to have more energy for, these trade-offs then look a lot more worthwhile. But yeah, it's definitely worth looking at your day and going like, where is it? The lunch break has got shorter over the past 15 years to the point where I think it averages at around 20 minutes now for people, which is crazy. Yeah, it's really bad. And I think that's because we have this idea that being productive means being at your computer rather than output.
Mhm.
In my experience, people don't work more than 4 or 5 hours properly. Now, if you take meetings and stuff outside of that, I mean, like work without distraction, but people are working that in about 12 hours and just like really, really inefficiently. I've got loads of different tabs open. I'll switch from all of them, find my brain for a bit. Oh, that feels shit. Go on social media for a while, go back to work, those sorts of things. So actually, there are ways where it can work more efficiently to the point where you can have a lunch break and you deserve a lunch break. Sometimes it's people convincing themselves, actually, I do deserve a lunch break.
And I think like we seem to have become scared of rest for the sake of like, oh, we see like, oh yeah, I will rest, but I will rest in the most productive way. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to go meditate for the next 45 minutes of my lunch. And it's like, all right, maybe we could have just gone out for a nice walk. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
we didn't
Yeah, but
need to
what
do,
podcast shall I listen to on my walk? And then I'll do this. You're like, no, just
yeah,
chill.
just go
Yeah,
listen to the birds tweeting. It's okay. Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, like I think having that time to just take space away from what you're doing, but then focusing on task. And like, if you're finding yourself being distracted, asking yourself, well, why am I being distracted?
Mm,
Like, what's distracting me? Is that distraction worth it, or is it making my life net worse? If
Yeah.
your distraction is scrolling through social media, then can we maybe do something else and that will help?
Yeah, yeah. I think the well-being industry on the whole has a huge obsession with well-being, but being doing things, and
Mm,
I think that's probably because it kind of profits from that. In that, if rest is not a particularly profitable thing to sell people. I'm not trying to be a conspiracist here, but like for example, like ice baths are a really common one. Nothing wrong with doing an ice bath, but you feel like you need to be doing. Whereas, like, would you get the same benefits from sitting and not doing for half an hour and learning how to be bored again? Something that I'm
mhm.
like criminally bad at.
Yeah.
Like when you find yourself like taking your phone from your desk while you go to the toilet, and you're just like, well, that is a problem. Like, how can I not be separated from my phone for this long? So, um, yeah, I think having more space where you do nothing is a really, really positive thing. If you can put that during a work day to allow your brain a chance to kind of catch back up, that's really going to help. And it's the sort of thing that people are like, oh, yeah, but like, what should I really do? Like, what things change? If you do that during a lunch break, that has a knock on effect on pretty much everything. So I generally think that lunch is where people start to struggle.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's like a lot of people don't have breakfast where I think they should have breakfast. Um, but then lunch, if we eat like while we're doing something, so people have like a sandwich in one hand and an email in another hand, um, your body doesn't really register the fact you're full. There's a bit of evidence that like whether your brain's paid attention, there's a role of working memory in how we eat later on. So if people aren't paying attention, their brain doesn't remember the fact they've eaten, so they eat more later in the day. So all these things where you're not paying attention, you don't feel full. Then that kind of slump comes in the afternoon. You're like, oh, now I need to have some more food to try and get me through. You eat more there. You've had bad food in the afternoon because you think that's a bad food. That affects what dinner choices you make because you think, oh, fuck it, I've already ruined today. That affects whether you go to the gym. It affects whether you eat a packet of minstrels in front of the TV. So actually that one lunch behavior, the butterfly effect of doing that or not doing that really does have huge knock-on effects for the rest of that day. And sometimes people are like, I've had a shit day, it may as well be 6 weeks now, and then wonder why they don't kind of get anywhere. Sometimes it is just one behavior that starts it all.
Yeah, and I think, like, for there where you almost have this, like, cascade of things that, like, improve because of that, like, one behavior, like, it's really important to go, well, if you can start taking a lunch break, if you can go for a walk on a morning, if you can even just spend 5 minutes, like, of doing nothing and just, like, resting, like, if you can do those things, will you find it easier not to overeat on hyperpalatable foods? The answer will probably be yes. Like,
Hmm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
like it's it never really comes down to the ingredients list of a food. It comes down to everything else that kind of sits in the context of your life.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's some research that shows that with a ultra processed food diet, there's very few studies where we actually control the variables. One that did it really well showed that people eat like 500 calories more on an ultra processed food diet. That was in a lab where the food's provided to them. And I don't know about you, but no one brings my food to me. I have to go to the shops or order it online or whatever. And so you think there are countless dozens of decisions that happen before I put the food in my mouth. And actually, if we're going to talk about ultra processed food, like why am I buying it? Because if it was just about, oh, that food's delicious, there wouldn't be brands. They wouldn't market it. And the brands would talk about the taste of things, but they don't. They talk about the emotions. There's so many things to think about when it comes to your food choices. It's not just about, does this food have nice mouthfeel or not? Because no one's ever said that when it comes to them eating too much of it. Just tasted so nice. It's normally, why did you do it? I was really stressed. I was really tired. I was really overwhelmed. I wanted a reward. I wanted to feel some joy. I wanted to feel something, full stop.
Yeah. I was hungry, but I made the wrong choice in what was gonna make me feel full, so I ate the entire box of Maltesers, like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, like, I think just, yeah, understanding that you need to like, when you eat food, what has gone on around that time is just
Mhm.
playing such a big role, and then how you react to that afterwards as well.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think there's like a secondary kind of guilt shame cycle, isn't there? And that like we make an emotional food choice. So I've overeaten because I feel stressed, but then I feel guilt around that food. And that makes me feel stressed. And then I eat more. And it can, like you said, cascade from there where there's kind of secondary food choices because of an initial emotion. So, but then that's also multiple opportunities to intervene. So can I give myself stress coping things to stop me turning to food? But then also when I do, because food's emotional, we all eat for emotional reasons sometimes, can I then change that conversation I have with myself about what happened to then not spiral and eat everything else that's in the house?
Yeah, and I think, like, this is a conversation of, well, if we took food out of the equation, you'd still do something else. Like
Yes.
you would have another possibly maladaptive like strategy
Mm,
for dealing with your stress. Like
yeah.
I was saying to my partner the other day, and I used to emotionally eat quite a lot when I felt like, particularly when I felt like lonely. I'd find that if I was by myself, like I was like, do you know what? Me and this chocolate bar, I'm gonna get right on. And for me, I was like, and she was like, What made the biggest difference for you?" And I was like, "Well, part of it is I have better coping strategies now, like as part of that." I was like, "But one of the other things is when I am lonely now, I scroll social media." And I was like,
Mm,
that is just an alternative maladaptive coping strategy to I'm just not eating, but like it's I am responding in the same way. And then I was like, maybe that's something else where I now need more tools in my toolbox. And it's about really important to look at how you are replacing behaviors as well.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting how social media has both contributed to that loneliness kind of epidemic and then also has become the coping strategy for that, which is a fantastic business model if you do own a social media
Yeah.
company. So I do. And then if you look at what happens on social media in terms of the algorithm, like you said, like it can make people feel worse. There was leaks from Meta where people with disordered eating patterns were shown stuff that was much worse for them in terms of body image and eating disorder adjacent content. So all of this thing around social media is both creating the problem and then also trying to give people a solution that's not a solution to the problem that's created. And then you get a perpetual cycle that's quite profitable.
Yeah. And I think that's asking who is benefiting from me seeing this content. Like, and
Yeah,
it's probably not you. Like,
probably not. No.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like, if you are leaving a piece of content thinking, "Oh, I don't feel great about myself right now," I would question if that is useful content for you to see. Because, like, I know that with the content that I try to share, I will always share practical tips of things you can add into your life. You can eat more protein, you can eat more fiber, and we can talk about foods being more optimal for your health and less optimal for your health. But that doesn't mean that they are good or bad because there's not morality attached to them. And I think like if you are leaving social media thinking, I feel really shitty about myself now
Yeah.
because I've been eating chocolate and chocolate turns out it's really bad for me and like I eat an ultra processed food and I'm going to die eating an ultra processed food. Like, yeah, I think they really, you want to ask yourself who benefited from that content.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And there's always context around food. So like the example I always give is from a sports background, I used to work with athletes, particularly because I work a lot in youth sports, so like 16 to 21. So it's a prime time for people with kind of issues around body image, issues around food. It's when we start to form some of these beliefs. I've worked with people who've had kind of 8, 9 stress fractures at the age of 19. And so that's from chronically overexercising and underfueling. In that circumstance, a Lucozade Sport that people would say, well, that's not good for you because it's just water and sugar. I can make a case for that being a health drink for that person because it's so important for them to get any sort of calories on, any sort of carbohydrate on, really does not matter. So if I can do that and it doesn't fill them up as well, that is a health promoting drink. If I'm working with someone who is a sedentary type 2 diabetic, then it's probably not health promoting. So maybe food does depend on the context as to whether it's good or not. Sometimes I would have a takeaway with family because it might not be optimal from a physical perspective, but socially and mentally it is. And we
Mhm.
are more complex than what goes on physiologically for us.
Yeah, like, and I think sometimes it's about understanding the context of your own life as well and going, okay, well, if my health is more than just what is on my plate and what I eat, like what I eat habitually is more important than what I eat in this one meal, that might be more useful for you to like go and actually to, if you are finding that you're feeling guilty about having a meal out, asking, well, is this meal out bringing me social joy? Is it bringing me
Hmm.
like connection to family? Is it bringing me like is it a connection to your partner? Like, what is the point of it? And going, was this like was this a useful like use of food? Like we can not everything has to be optimized. Like we don't
Yeah.
have to eat the perfect diet because that probably doesn't exist.
No, and if it doesn't, we do optimize for it. Do we have a perfect like life from a health perspective? Probably not, because the things you're going to have to sacrifice to do that are probably not great. Again, like in sport, people think about sport as like the pinnacle of health. Most athletes I know, physically certainly not. They all come out with injuries and think of like rugby, for example, at the moment, there's a case being heard for head injuries and World
Uh,
Rugby had been taken to court. Football, you see in the same, risk of ACL and things like that. So it's certainly not the pinnacle for physical health. We have a strange optimization culture at the moment, I think, probably social media led, where sport is the pinnacle of physical health. The pinnacle of mental health seems to be like ex-SAS people. And I just think these are really, really niche things where I don't want to have physical health standards of an elite athlete, A, because I'm not an elite athlete, and B, because that's not always best. And I
Mm.
don't want to have the mental fitness of someone whose whole experience was being shot at in Afghanistan, because that's not really that like relatable to my life.
Also, like, I think we forget that like these high stress and high pressure situations like should be pretty niche. Like
Yeah.
unless you like unless you are like in a like high stress job where you are working, let's say, in the police and you are like the armed
Mm.
response unit and you are constantly being called out to, and your life is constantly at threat. Like, and you're constantly sat in your fight or flight. The stress, the stress techniques that you use to deal with versus an office worker might be slightly different. Like, might
Yeah.
that's all right, and you might use food as a different, like, you use food in a different way.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm really anxious because my brain thinks I'm being chased by a tiger," but I'm actually just getting an email from HR. Like, they're not the same thing. So trying to make your brain think, "Oh, this is really scary," and it's a really strange thing, I think. But I'm all for people optimizing, but within the constraints that their life has. So for me, as a business owner, I've got a 7-month-old son. Like, my training is not optimized for physical health. It's optimized for my lower back not feeling 95 so I can pick him up, which most of the time it does, to be honest. But it's optimizing for like eating well most of the time. So I've got enough energy to survive and being able to cope on no sleep. But also optimized for having a beer at the weekend because God knows I've earned one. So it's optimized within my life, but it wouldn't look optimal to an elite athlete. But fortunately, I'm probably not going to be at the next Olympics in LA, so it doesn't matter.
I think as well they're like optimized for your life is really
Yeah.
important. Like, it is individual. Like the way
Yeah.
my optimal life in terms of my like my physical health, my social health, my like mental health, like all of those aspects of my health, if I optimized for those but then gave them to you, you probably would not be happy and
Yeah.
vice versa.
Yeah.
It would just be like we would be living different lives. So like I think in that sense as well, like yeah, it's all right for it's all right for your life to look different from the other person on social media. Like
Yeah.
it's really important to recognize that as a whole. I mean, with or like on that note, do you eat ultra processed foods?
Oh, literally all the time. And again, like he's 7 months old now, so there are times that I don't exist on them for weeks, just almost solely. Yeah, I could give you a handful of examples. Somewhere, I think I did a post about this not long ago, where my diet would be objectively worse if I didn't eat them.
Yeah.
In the point where I weigh about 110 kilos, my protein intake, I would not hit what I would want to know resistance train as well if I didn't use ultra processed food. Like, whey is a significant part of my protein intake because food is a pain in the ass to cook. It's not the cheapest. Whey is a really, really good alternative. My fruit and veg intake would not be great, except I have whey protein and I will use 4 different types of frozen fruit across the day and go in that twice. So I've now got a good amount, 80 grams of protein, 4 portions of fruit that I would not get without ultra processed food. So same with yogurt. Sometimes it's not just the yogurt that's great for me, but it's the things that allows me to put on. Where if I didn't do that, I'd have a sandwich, which maybe would have less variety and less benefits. My fiber intake would be worse because I use grains pouches for lunch because they're a really convenient way of getting more fiber. There's a plethora of different reasons why ultra processed food, as it's currently categorized, are beneficial to me.
Yeah.
I don't exist solely on chocolate, which I think when people say, "Oh, all processed food," "Oh, you like all that," I'm like, yeah, but not like just that sort. I don't only eat pot noodles.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. Is like if you are eating exclusively ultra processed food and you are eating it in the context of you're having a chocolate bar for breakfast, chocolate bar for lunch, cereal bar for dinner, like, and then a pot noodle as your snack in between, like, all right, maybe we've got some issues there with your nutrition, but like if the
Yes.
ultra processed food is like complementing an already, a diet that is already like full of like stuff that you like, need. You're getting the protein in, you're getting the fiber in, you're getting your plants in for the, your
Yeah.
gut microbiome. If you are getting those things in your diet, you eating a little bit of chocolate is not an issue. And if you are eating those foods anyway, you are far less likely to overeat on like chocolate because you are full. You are not eating it to or your Pringles or whatever because you're not eating the Pringles to be full because that's a very
Mhm.
ineffective way to be full. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so strange. Like if you say, "Oh yes, sometimes I will eat ultra processed food," like people just assume that you're desperate to get scurvy. I'm like, I'm not eating the other foods. I'm just sometimes using these to supplement a mostly whole food diet.
Yeah. I think
So
that's a really
yeah.
a really good way of putting it, and that's where I guess the phrase 80/20 comes in, of
Mm,
80% of your foods can come from whole foods, or rather from foods. I like to phrase it as a way that, like, from foods that like are optimal for your health or improve your health, and then 20% can come from foods that don't really add anything to your health other than,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I like a bit of Pringles, or, I like a bit of
yeah,
chocolate.
yeah.
If you can do it that way around, and then in the 80% you can include your protein powder, you
You'd
can
have ultra
include,
processed food still. Yeah.
yeah, like, and it doesn't have to be this black and white, "Oh my god, it wasn't grown, therefore I
No.
am exclusively eating, like,
Yeah.
vegetables because that's,"
Yeah.
and vegetables and the chicken that's slaughtered out bag. Like, if
Yeah.
that's all you're able to eat within the 80%, you're gonna be very hungry and then end up going in the
Yes.
wrong
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
To test the healthy food. Is this a healthy food? Is it not? What are the healthy swaps for this? Just bore off. It does not resemble to me what nutrition is in the slightest.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. I think there's a reason why all of the decent nutrition research we have looks at dietary patterns for people, not individual foods,
Mhm.
because it's incredibly difficult to even look at the interactions between different types of foods, which when you consume however many meals we have over the week, it's kind of like, yeah, we just need to look at the patterns, which is why like research looks at a kind of Mediterranean diet and says, oh, this seems to be best. Of course it does, because it seems to tick off most of the things that we would recommend day to day anyway. Yeah, the only being asked is this a healthy food or not is probably my second least question after someone asking me, what do you do for work when I'm at a social event? And then I
Like,
tell them
what
and they
don't I
start,
do for work?
yeah, yeah. Well, there is that. But then people are like, I'm like a nutritionist. I'm like, and then you immediately you get, oh, well, today I've eaten this and
Yeah, oh, yeah,
you're
yeah,
not
yeah.
paying me. I'm trying to have a burger. Leave me alone.
Yeah. I would
Yeah.
like to eat my ultra-processed food now, please.
Yeah, yeah, literally. Yeah. Can you just get me a bottle of beer and shut up? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, on that note then, and this is a question that I like to ask for everybody,
Hmm.
but what does being healthy mean to you?
It's a great question. And you sent it me before, and I've been trying to think about it ever since, and it's still quite difficult. I would say for me, it's kind of like having the capacity to live the life that you want to do, that you enjoy. And sometimes that is the physical capacities. Like, again, if we do not exercise, you probably are going to be struggling to do the things that you want to do. But also having like the mental capacity where if you are obsessed with food to the point where it takes up all of your headspace, you therefore can't do things that you enjoy. It might be that you don't have a life where you've got things that you enjoy, and that's the problem. So I think there's two parts to it, having the capacity, but also having things you enjoy, and the two of them going together. So much of the fitness and health conversation is around like how do we make this more like the most important thing in your life? And I just think like, how do we get away with making it as like minimal as possible? I think for a lot of people, they'd be better off if they thought about food and fitness and everything as like the fourth or fifth most important thing for them, and then lived like that. Um,
Mm,
but all of the advice online is like how to make your training more important than your kids, and you're just like, no, no, like it's not.
yeah. I don't know. It depends on how much you hate your kids.
Well, true, or how much you love training. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, how bad if you prefer split squats over your kid, like how much of a toss is your child?
Yeah, really.
It's got
So,
to be pretty
yeah, at that
bad.
point, I just put your kid up for adoption, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Honestly, if burpees are beating him, just give him someone else.
yeah. That's it. If you like, do you know what? I'd rather go to the gym to do my Bulgarian split squats. I think that says a lot
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
you.
Packing
Yeah,
stuff up.
yeah.
Yeah,
But then in reality, that then probably comes back to your parenting technique. So really, the onus falls back on you again.
probably is my fault again. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Or bonus points if you use your child and you hold them as the dumbbell whilst you're doing your Bulgarian
Training.
split. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the ethics of like having your child purely for functional reasons.
I reckon there's not been that much research into it. So
Also, no, true. And it's also great for progressive overload because as they get bigger,
yeah.
it's more of a stimulus, isn't it? So that's true.
I had someone on, we were talking about how to like do as your kids age, like kind of what challenges you'll experience from a health perspective, and that's what I said. I was like, you could, as your child gets heavier, the progressive
Yeah.
overload. Yeah,
It starts off as like a kettlebell and becomes a barbell over time.
exactly. Yeah, and then by the time they're 18 and it's not really appropriate to pick them up anymore, then
Yeah.
that's when you can get back to the gym. Yeah,
But you still can. Yeah. So everyone like at their graduation when you're back squatting your child, everyone's like, wow, that's impressive.
like, thank you. I've been training for 18 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's been absolutely a fascinating conversation, Charlie. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to find you, they want to follow you, where's the best place to do that?
Instagram, despite the fact that we just slagged off social media for an hour, is probably the best place. So my Instagram is at cvnutrition_. I also have a Substack for people that like reading longer stuff, which is called Food is the Symptom. So they're the two best places to find me.
Cool. So if you want to do some reading, then go check out Charlie's content. As one of your activities that you do
Yes,
that's not scrolling
not doom
social
scrolling.
media. Yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for coming on. And if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you give it a 5-star rating or review and make sure that you follow the show. But otherwise, I will catch you in the next one.